Hi, this is Sociological Lens. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about the relationship between media and fear. We will begin by looking at why social media outlets often amplify fear, how this creates cycles of public anxiety, and why certain social issues like crime, immigration, health threats, or societal others are cast as menacing threats. This is where moral panic theory becomes vital. Sociologist Stanley Cohen's concept of moral panic shows how media portrayal can exaggerate perceived dangers, leading society to react strongly, sometimes even changing laws and policies. A perceived problem is given massive attention, spiraling into public concern, institutional action, and then often fading away or being reframed after time. This pattern illuminates how media outlets play a critical role in shaping the public's understanding of social dangers. Building on Cohen's ideas, we will talk about two chapters from David Alteid's work, which examines how news media not only reports on, but also constructs social fears, what he calls a problem frame. Alteid highlights that media doesn't simply present neutral news, it selects and reshapes narratives in ways that evoke specific emotional responses, particularly a fear, which is highly engaging for audiences. He argues that this emphasis on fear is linked to power structures and economic goals, as fearful content keeps viewers as readers engaging, sustaining media profits, and reinforcing existing norms. In today's lecture, we will discuss how these frameworks help us understand the media's role in creating fear, why this matters, and what are the implications are for both individuals and society. The relationship between media and fear is complex and has evolved over time with a shift from old media to new media. Let's talk about old media and new media and what we mean by them. So, old media refers to traditional forms of mass communication like newspaper, radio, and television, while new media includes digital platforms, social media, blogs, and online news sources. The evolution from old media to new media has significantly influenced how fear and danger are framed, shaping public perception of threats in different ways. In the era of old media, the flow of information was largely one directional. Journalists and broadcasters presented news to the public with minimal feedback or interaction. Gatekeepers like editors, publishers, and network heads held the authority to decide which events were newsworthy. They curated and framed dangers based on what they deemed most relevant or important. This controlled top-down approach meant that audiences generally received similar information, creating a shared sense of concern or media around specific issues. Old media typically frame threats in identifiable, often tangible ways. If you look at the history, for example, in the Cold War era, newspapers and television heavily emphasized the dangers of communism and nuclear war, establishing an atmosphere of mutual distrust and anxiety. That shifts in the era of war on drugs in 1980s. Television networks frequently at the time highlighted drug-related crime, often reinforcing stereotypes and heightening the fear of urban crime. And later on, during and after the post 9/11 terrorism, television and print news repeatedly showed images images of the attacks in the aftermath, building and collective perception of terrorism as imminent, pervasive threat. Old media focus was often on external threats like foreign enemies or visible issues like crime waves, and the limited range of sources meant fewer alternative viewpoints were available. This created a powerful and unified narrative that could reinforce fear on a large scale, encouraging collective responses such as national security policies or responses from internal affairs and stuff. New media, on the other hand, changed the framing of fear largely. The emergence of new media has transformed the ways we perceive, interpret, and respond to information. With digital platforms and social media, the flow of information is no longer one directional. It is interactive, fast pacing, and decentralized. Users not only consume content but also create and share it, generalizing a vast area of perspectives on any given issue. New media frames fear differently in several ways if we compare to old media. Um, Algorithmic applications is one of the reasons platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube prioritize content that attracts high engagement, which often means sensational or fear induced stories spread quickly. Algorithms favor content that resonates emotionally, leading to rapid and widespread coverage of certain threats. Um, Issues can go viral instantly, reaching global audiences in minutes sometimes. This uh, fast-paced environment can amplify certain fears or threats that may have previously been contained within specific regions or communities. Unlike the unified collective fears of old media, media more personalized fears. Social media exposes users to real-time incidents like neighborhood crime, reports through apps, for example, Citizen, which heightens individual awareness and potentially anxiety over localized dangers. Some of the prominent examples can be like COVID-19 pandemic. Social media allowed for immediate updates and personal accounts on the pandemic, but also created a flood of misinformation, intensifying fear and confusion. And there are also example can be climate change. Digital media hosts a wide range of views on environmental crisis, from scientific updates to activist calls for action, giving voice to diverse perspectives that build different narratives about urgency and threat levels. Um, and also, health and safety apps can be another example. Apps that report local crimes and safety incidents allow for personalized danger awareness, sometimes leading to an increased sense of insecurity within communities. So, how the framing of danger changed over time? The shift from old media to new media has led to fragmented and diversified framing of danger. Old media fostered collective fear by shaping uniform narratives about external threats. New media, however, creates more individualized fear, exposing people to varied and sometimes conflicting information. Also, gatekeeping to decentralization is another difference. While old media had centralized gatekeepers that who took look after the media, new media allows everyone to produce and disseminate information, which increases the variety of perspectives, but also lead to misinformation and heightened anxiety. Old media also often focuses on tangible threats like war and crime, while new media covers more diffuse and systemic threats like climate change and mental health, which are less easily contained but widely discussed online. The relationship between media and fear has transformed from the centralized collective experience under old media to decentralized, personalized, and more immediate sense of danger in the era of the news media, I mean. While old media used created narratives to guide public perceptions, new media creates a dynamic, often volatile information landscape where multiple narratives coexist, shaping fear in diverse, sometimes overwhelming ways. Sociologists often view fear in media as a tool that shapes public perceptions and behaviors, especially around issues like crime, immigration, and social deviance. And it can be also like a health issues and other like a local dangers or whatever is happening in our societies. Fear-driven media coverage often uses sensationalism or attract attention, reinforcing stereotypes or amplifying perceived threats. And I would like to talk more about um, moral panic theory today, which is formed by Stanley Cohen, suggests that media outlets can amplify issues, creating exaggerated public concern and moral panic is a widespread feeling of fear and concern among the public that sometimes threatens societal norms and values. Moral panic theory explains how certain events, people, or groups are perceived as a threat to social order, leading to heightened public concern, fear, and reactions that can seem disproportionate to the actual threat. The term was popularized by sociologist Stanley Cohen in the 1970s when he studied the public reaction to conflicts between youth subcultures in the UK. According to Cohen, moral panics occur when society perceives a deviation from its norms as dangerous, triggering a cycle of alarm and response to media and public institutions. There are 6 stages of moral panic as outlined by Cohen and expanded by later theorists. So the first is the definition of threat or identification of problem. A particular issue, behavior, or group is identified as a threat to societal values and interests. In this stage, this group or behavior is cast as a folk devil, an entity that embodies wrongdoing and the threat to social norms. For example, youth subcultures like mods or rockers in the 1960s in UK, or violent video games, or in modern times, are identified as dangerous, corrupting societal norms. And the second is exaggeration and distortion. The media plays a central role by amplifying and exaggerating the problem. They often present sensationalized stories relying on dramatic language and emphasize the threat. This heightened coverage leads to public to view the issue is widespread and dangerous, even if evidence may be lacking. Headlines about dangerous video games or social media challenges create urgency and amplify the issue, often repeating exaggerated claims and attract public concerns. And the symbolization comes after that, due to the intense media focus that, the symbols created during this exaggeration and distortion, and then public concern increases because of that. Due to the intense media focus, public fear and anxiety increase, leading people to perceive the problem as significant threat. This reaction can create a moral backlash where society feels it must protect its values. Um, Concern over violent video games, for example, causing aggression among youth, as seen in debates in 1990s and 2000s, spurring widespread public fear despite mixed scientific evidence. And then this gets to authorities. In response to public pressure, authorities, lawmakers, or social institutions intervene. This may include enforcing stricter laws, increasing policing, implementing policies, or making public statements condemning the behavior. Examples can be governments around the world considering or implementing bans and age restrictions on video games, and politicians publicly condemning games or other media or harmful influences. So then there can be also policy or social control measures. Measures are put into place to counteract the perceived threat, often leading to long-term societal control efforts. These measures may disproportionately target the identified group, reinforcing negative stereotypes and, in some cases, infringing on freedoms. The institution of censorship or rating systems for media content bans, or regulations on certain subcultural activities can be an examples of long-term control measures. And then lastly, you will perceive the either decline or re-evaluation of this, what was portrayed in this event. Over time, public interests in the problem diminishes, or the attention just goes towards something else, or it evolves as society moves on. If the problem was initially exaggerated, it often subsides when evidence surfaces disproving the initial fear, or society redefines its views on the matter. In the other cases, sustained media and public interest can lead to more new moral panics. For example, the initial fears around comic books, jazz music, rock and roll, or Dungeons and Dragons in the past decades eventually faded, even though each was initially viewed as a moral crisis. So just to summarize moral panic theory, it helps examine or explain how societies react to certain changes or behaviors that challenge the status quo, often revealing underlying anxieties and power dynamics that drive these exaggerated responses. It also shows how media and authority can shape and public perception, often without substantial evidence, creating short-lived but intense social crisis. And we will look at some of the examples from past. For example, in 1860s and 70s, there was a panic towards this very cheap publications. One of the academic journals write in 1968, juvenile criminality, largely attributable to the spread of cheap publications and theatrical representation of an exciting and immoral character which corrupt the children of the lower classes and stimulate them into courses of dishonesty and vice. Now you take a look at this publication here. You probably see, you can see something like a Superman and maybe witch, and that this is nothing besides what we can see in comic books and movies and other things today, but it was a moral panic at that time. And then later on, in 1930s and 40s, people start to get radios. And there was I don't know how radio can create public panic, moral panic, but there was one. In 1936, there was a American Journal of Psychiatry published an article saying parents have become aware of a puzzling change in the behavior patterns of their children. They cannot lock out this intruder because it has gained an invincible hold of their children. And they're talking about the radio here. And later on, the phones start to show in the families, and there was a moral panic of telephone addiction. There was several newspaper articles, academic articles, one of which says one of the most serious unreported disabling antisocial diseases in America today is that of telephone addiction. Now, probably they're talking about, women who stayed home at that time, talking for hours to their friends or their mother-in-law, I don't know. So that was considered as moral panic, that people had telephone addiction. And then this is our time, and there is moral panics about how how we are getting involved with our smartphones, how people becoming like zombies. There is a couple of them I selected for your view. One of them says how smartphones destroy the generations. That's published in 2017 in Atlantic. And also there is publication in New York Post in 2016 that says how screens turn kids into psychotic junkies. And looking at this picture, there was like a larger one. Actually, there was like several people looking at their phone while they're having dinner. And I thought, is this a good image of us, or if there was a zombie kind of look, would be much better to explain how to view current generations. In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about two chapters from David Alteid's 2002 book that called Creating Fear, News and the Construction of Crisis. First, I'm going to talk about chapter 3, which is called the problem frame and the production of fear. Then later, after this, I will be talking about chapter 1. So in chapter 3 of Creating Fear, News, and the Construction of Crisis, David Alteid introduces the concept of problem frame and its role in producing fear through media narratives. Alteid argued that the news media, particularly in the United States, often adopts a formulaic approach to framing stories about social issues. This frame not only emphasizes threat and victimization, but also plays a significant role in how audiences interpret risk, danger, and crisis. Here's some of the breakdowns of this book or chapter. So, understanding the problem frame. The problem frame is a template that the media uses to cover social issues and tends to focus on dramatic, often sensational aspects of event. This frame is powerful because it amplifies what's going on. It simplifies complex social issues by framing them as immediate problems that are out of control, often without delving into understanding causes and broader context. Instead, it constructs an image or imminent danger or crisis that requires immediate attention or action. Um, you can see here that that it just shows how that is created. So in the problem frame, events are portrayed as clear threats. Stories fit neatly into good versus evil narrative, often framing certain individuals or groups as threat to societal order. It is simplified and decontextualized. Complex issues are distilled down to easily understandable stories without much examination of contributing social, economic, or political factors. And also, it requires immediate solutions. The framing suggests that the frame of the problem is pressing and requires urgent action, thereby often calling for greater social control and authoritative intervention. So the events happen somewhere over here, and the media uses that to accumulation of fear by problem frame, which is narrative structure, universal and the moral themes, specific time and place, and also keeps them ambiguous. Sometimes it exists that something undesirable. The problem frame highlights the thing is that's undesirable. Many people are affected by this problem frame. It's ambiguous. It is changed or fixed. There is a mechanism or a procedure for fixing the problem, and that exaggerates fear in society. The production of fear, according to Altid, the media leverages the problem frame to cultivate a lens or sense of fear and security in the public. He suggests that the media environment, especially post 9/11, prioritized stories that invoked fear to attract viewers and maintain attention in a competitive media landscape. Key elements can be like repeated themes of danger, victimization and vulnerability, authority and control. So let's take a look at each of them. The media often focuses on crime and terrorism and other sensational threats by repeatedly presenting stories of violence, disaster, or moral decay. The public comes to perceive these issues as more prevalent and dangerous than they may be in reality. So Altid notes that a central aspect of the problem frame is the positioning of individuals and communities as potential victims. This angle emphasizes vulnerability and positions of individuals and communities as potential victims. That resonates strongly with viewers and reinforces the perception that they are potentially at risk. Um, Authority of control, in certain in response to perceived threats, the media often portrays authorities like police and military, government officials as the necessary protectors of problem solvers. This portrayal encourages support for increased control measures, which as surveillance encourages support for increased control measures such as surveillance or tougher laws, and reinforces reliance on authorities to address the perceived danger. There is impact on policy and public perception. The problem frame um, influence not only how individuals perceive risk, but also how they respond to social issues and view certain groups within society. Altit argues that this frame can solve significant um, the frame can have significant implications. The heightened sense of fear can push public opinion toward supporting policies that might not align with the true scale or causes of problem, leading to a reactionary legislation or policy shift. This response can in turn limit civil liberties and promote more punitive social policies. Recently, I took one video lecture on how portrayal of immigrants as dangerous helped Donald Trump to gain presidential candidacy in 1916. And in today's day, it's just working for him as well. Certain groups, such as immigrants, racial minorities, or youth, are often scapegoated within the problem frame, leading to increased stereotyping and stigmatization. For example, media framing of immigrant groups as threat to society influences public perception and fuels xenophobia. So that's what Trump used for his candidacy. Over time, this constant focus on fear normalizes as environment where audiences expect and accept fear-driven narratives. This normalization can lead to a passive acceptance of increased surveillance and control measures over time, and also as public comes to see these actions as justified responses to perpetual threats. There are, of course, certain limitations to the problem frame, and there's always criticism towards this. While problem frame is effective in capturing public attention, it has limitations and risks. Sometimes it oversimplifies issues, desensitization, and fear-driven society. By reducing complex issues to simplified stories, the media fails to provide audiences with the context needing to understand the root causes of problems such as economic inequality or systemic racism. The entertainment format of the news is key to the rise of problem frame, and that's very problematic as well. Repeated exposure to fear-induced stories can lead to desensitization, where the public becomes numb to certain issues. This may either reduce the effectiveness of fear as a motivator for action or cause people to disengage from real pressing issues that don't align with the sensationalized problem frame. That also, like, audience members is become willing to suspend disbelief. So, Altid warns the constant exposure to fear-centered narratives can shape a culture that is reactive rather than reflective, making it difficult for society to engage in productive discourse on social issues. The problem frame becomes entertainment, it's taken as entertainment, and it that just kind of numbs people. So it also um, increases like narrative structure, universal moral meaning, specific time and place, as we talked about these issues. So the in conclusion, chapter three, Altit effectively demonstrates how the problem frame functions as a tool for producing fear in the public. This framing simplifies complex social issues into clear threats. It promotes an atmosphere of victimization and vulnerability, and ultimately supports a culture that accepts fear as a normal part of everyday life. Altit's analysis suggests that the media's approach to framing problems is not just a matter of storytelling, but has serious social and political implications, shaping not only public opinion, but also public policy and the broader culture and fear within society. So that is Altid's chapter three. Now, fear of crime is also written in many articles. I did not take all of them, like analyze Altid's chapter, but fear of crime lacks a common definition among social science researchers. It can generally be understood as an emotional response to danger or threat, as an actual or potential criminal incidents that's coming from Henson and Rain's 2015 publication. It is potentially harmful consequences on individual well-being. So when it comes to perceived danger through crime, there are two things we see. Perceived risk is a cognitive aspect of fear that can be understood as the perceived likelihood of criminal victimization and concern for safety rather than an emotional response to a threat. That's number one. Number two is fear of crime has often been examined on the individual level. However, both context and individual factors have been found to contribute to creating fear. So fear also affects social cohesion. Social integration describes cohesion and connection within society and protects against fear of crime. And that is also coming from that publication by Henson and Rains. They argue that the contribution of social integration allows individuals to cope with their own negative experiences related to crime while also providing a support system for members of society to act against crime. So fear brings people together. So in a way that people want to fight against it, or at least stay together to face this dangerous together as groups or society. Hansen and Rains also says that the vulnerability perspective posits that those more vulnerable to falling victim to crime also experience greater fear of crime. So there is a different distribution of fear when people view this kind of episodes in media or social media. So theoretical analysis of fear, we have been reviewing many theoretical aspects of fear in our previous lectures. The gender fear paradox describes how, despite being more fearful, women are targeted less by crime with the exception of sexual assault. So in more crimes, men are targeted more, and in sexual assaults, women are targeted more. And when we think about the aspect of fear, drawing on how women are disproportionately affected by sexual assault, the shadow hypothesis suggests that fear of crime in women to be primarily determined by an overarching fear of sexual assault. As fear of sexual assault um, pervades, fear of crime is intensified by perceived risk, as women believe being victim to any crime could escalate sexual assault. That's also from that publication. So let's talk about framing theory. That framing theory is a concept of the study of communication in media. So just if you look at this picture over here, you can see this person is running away and the other person has a knife or something sharp on his hand. But the framing of this part shows that this person has something sharp and the other person is a victim. And that is actually called problem framing. And you can tell from the picture what really problem framing means. It posits that the way information is framed or structured and conceptualized significantly influences how audiences understand and interpret that information. This theory explores the power of media and other communications to shape public perception and discourage by highlighting certain aspects of topic while downplaying or omitting other parts. The first chapter, as I mentioned earlier, by Altid, is about that's called the Creating Fear, News, and the Construction of Crisis. The book is called that, and the chapter is Give the Devil His Due, Fear and Its Place. So it is one of the very important chapters actually in Altid's book, I believe. David Altid sets in this chapter the stage for his analysis by examining how fear is constructed and maintained through news media. He argues that modern society has seen a significant shift in how it perceives and reacts to risk, largely due to the ways in which fear is produced and amplified by media. And he talks about the fear as a socially constructed phenomena. Yeah. So in the first part of it, Altit begins by explaining that fear is not just a natural reaction to danger, but is often socially constructed through cultural narratives and media portrayals. He posits that fear is a response shaped by social forces and institutions, especially through the stories and images perpetuating in the media. In modern times, fear is less about actual threat and more about perceived threats, often reinforced by media coverage and exaggerated certain dangers. This construction of fear aligns with the symbolic interactionist perspective, which emphasizes how meaning and perceptions are created through social interaction. Altit suggests that media plays a crucial role in defining threats, thereby influencing how society perceives various issues, people, or situations. The politics of fear refers to the the politics of fear. The politics of fear refers to the decision makers' promotion and use of audience beliefs and assumptions about danger, risks, and fear in order to achieve certain goals. So Altid also argues that the media amplifies fear by repeatedly covering certain types of stories, uh, particularly those involving violence, crime, and social deviance. The ways in which news media is structured with an emphasis on sensational and dramatic elements attract public attention, but also distorts the reality of risk. This distortion leads to heightened sense of danger that may not correspond to actual risk levels in society. And fear has emerged as a framework for developing identities and for engaging in social social life. So he says that we live in a secular society, so the mass media don't include many references to fear of God. They don't refer to, they do refer a lot to fear of crime. So we can see that um, sensationalism, selective focus, emotional appeals are some of the parts of media, exaggerating events or focusing on the most dramatic aspects of a story to increase viewership, emphasizing particular issues such as crime and terrorism, while neglecting other significant social problems which can skew the public's understanding of what truly risk is. Using language and imagery that elicits strong emotional reactions, making stories more memorable and fear inducing. So the mass media also um, creates identities. We experience them at the same time, place, and manner. As we mentioned in the third chapter, the product and process or reflexive. The product is in the identity, and the identity appears explicitly and implicitly in the numerous advertisements. Media images loop through various media types and messages, moving from initial claim to established fact to background information. Um, in his writings, Altid also talks about the social narrative as reflect social order and communication processes. He talks about fear being more widely used today because news organizations and news stories benefit from that. And Altid examines the cultural context of fear and the shift towards a society more oriented around risk and security. He discusses how historical events like Cold War creating a cultural backdrop of anxiety, which the media continues to tap into. This culture of fear encourages institutions, including governments and corporations, to position themselves as protectors, thereby legitimizing certain policies and practices in the name of public safety. And of course, the fear is often used for social control, the process by which people behave in ways that meet the expectations of others. And, sometimes authorities, fear plays a large part in social control. The things we fear are related to how we communicate and learn about everyday life. And it also, like social life, has moved towards risk society organized around communication, orienting to policing, control, and prevention of risks. The central theme in this chapter is the idea that construction of fear serves as a tool for social control by promoting sense of constant risk the media helps to shape public behavior and attitudes in ways that make people more willing to accept policies or norms that they might otherwise question. Fear of crime, terrorism, or even social change makes individuals more compliant with security measures and more willing to see personal freedoms for the sake of safety. Altid also highlights the political implications of fear based narratives. He argues that governments and authorities capitalize on media generated fears to implement policies that enhance their control over society. By emphasizing threats, governments can increase their power under the guise of protecting citizens. Um, the preoccupation with fear also addresses the role of commercial interests in shaping media content. He argues that news organizations driven by the need to attract viewers and advertisers often resort to fear based content because it is compelling that ensures audience engagement. So we live in the attention economy, right? This media's reliance on advertising revenue incentivizes the production of sensational stories that captivate viewers, even if this approach results in skewing perceptions of reality. The this commercializing that commercialization of fear has significant consequence. It creates a market for fear-based narratives and reinforces the cycles of fear as viewers become accustomed to stories that evoke strong emotions. Altid argues that this dynamic makes the media complicit in shaping a society increasingly governed by fear and anxieties. The most critical shift in fear involves the growth of audiences who share and participate in popular culture as part of their everyday affairs. Fear has shifted from concerns with the physical world and the spiritual realm to salvation during the last 400 years to social realm of everyday life today. So to summarize, in chapter 1, Altit provides a foundational understanding of how fear is constructed, amplified, and used within society. He concludes that the consequences of this construction of fear are far-reaching, affected individual behavior, public policy, and societal values. His main points are like fear is a product of social institutional forces, not just individual experiences. The second point he makes is the media plays a primary role in creating a sustained fear, and sustained media plays a primary role in creating and sustaining fear, often through sensationalism and selective storytelling. Another point he makes is institutions use media generated fear to justify policies that enhance social control, influencing how people perceive threats and how society responds to those risks. So in today's lecture, we talked about the relationship between media and fear. For that, we analyzed 2 chapters from Altid's book, and we also talked about Moral Panic by Stephen Cohen, and viewed some of the moral panics historically, how there was moral panic towards cheap publications and radio, and in our time, of course, towards smartphones. And this is our short video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you or talk to you in our next video lectures. Bye.